in order to get the debt to GDP down, they can either bring the debt down, unrealistic, or get the GDP up. So there's this financial repression where you let inflation run really hot, so GDP goes up because of the inflation. But the problem is then they have to kind of restrict the capital within that. And so it's not politically palatable at this point to let inflation run hot. But if they could blame it on a war, oh, it's Putin's fault, it's Israel, it's Hamas's fault, whatever it may be, then we could potentially get that inflation that they want, that they need, and blame it on the war. That's the narrative part that you're talking about.
Yeah,
And at the same,
exactly. Yeah,
go
they
ahead.
can't just say, look, our decades of, kind of just broad-based spending and tax policies have contributed to a uh, destabilizing situation, and therefore it's going to just kind of inflate on its own. They need an external reason, right? And so that
Yeah.
anything that they can use, they're willing to jump on. And in the prior kind of couple years, I think the Federal Reserve intended to be slower to raise rates in response to the inflation. They kind of signaled that pretty strongly, but the public reaction to that inflation was pretty, negative pretty quickly, and so they changed course pretty quickly. And so that was not enough cover for them to do what they want to do, but potentially a war is. And so I think that, we'll see how this plays out. But basically, the more that they can blame inflation on an external source, and then therefore also blame the need for capital controls and things like that on an external source, and to drive up the fear of security, that's really what kind of captures a lot of people.
So war is like this perfect double whammy, so to speak. Not only can they get an excuse to get inflation up, but they also get an excuse to get capital controls in place at the same time, which they need both. And yeah, that's perfect. You put out a tweet and you said technology changes how humans have to interact with things, and unfortunately, it takes time and experience. And you were talking about the fall of publisher media gatekeepers is good, but it means we have to pick our media if we don't want to be uninformed. And then you also said the fall of money security gatekeepers also mean we have to pick our money. So technology, as I say the same thing, it always changes the way the world works because of how we communicate and we organize. It changes the way we organize as well. And so sort of what you're saying is this. The way that we're communicating now is much faster. We don't need a gatekeeper to get information out there anymore. And that's good for us. So it's creating this sort of like ground level decentralized movement, but it's sort of the opposite of what the gatekeepers want. And so now there's multiple battles being fought. And so now sort of, and you put another tweet sort of referencing the Patriot Act. And so now they see maybe this disruption in these open monetary or open, let's say, communication networks. And in this, in this war scenario, they are using that as a way to clamp down on it. Is that what you're seeing with the Patriot Act reference?
Yeah, we've been seeing that, and the Patriot Act was specifically there was a recent FinCEN proposal to basically dramatically increase the reporting requirements on various private types of crypto transactions, to the point where it's so broadly and vaguely worded that it applies to almost everything.
Yeah.
And so it's basically a pretty draconian thing, and they cite Section 311 of the Patriot Act as part of their justification for it. So that parts of the Patriot Act are alive and well, all these a couple decades later, um, and so I think that's kind of a challenge. And going back to the gatekeeper point, basically in the old model, and this was largely just technology driven, what the limitations we had is that if you wanted to publish a book, or if you wanted to have a radio show or have a TV show, these were kind of gate kept. There's publishers, there were broadcasters, and there's a lot of cons that come with that, especially in a less free society. A couple pros are that they filter out some of the, there's some quality filter to it in a healthy market. It's if the whole world's watching Walter Cronkite, they're at least on the kind of the same set of facts they're working with as they debate each other. But as that devolves into either more propaganda type of media or just more corporate captured media, that kind of disintegrates. And so the fact that technology has made it easier to self-publish a book, or easier to start your own radio show or start your own TV show, that's literally what we're doing right now. These more peer-to-peer interactions bring down the importance of the gatekeepers, which is a net good. But then it takes adjustment to that, because a lot of low quality stuff enters the market, and people can get siloed into their own echo chambers, right? So where they have a bubble and they only follow people that are kind of just like them, and then they end up getting shocked at certain outcomes because they forget that they're in a small bubble and that most of the world doesn't think like them, but most of the world's in their own bubbles too. And so increasingly there's people in their own little bubbles. And so I think that as we have this more peer-to-peer world, it does take some adjustment and more responsibility on our part to go out and make sure we have a higher level view. Like what is this silo thinking now? What is this silo thinking? What silos am I unconsciously in that I might not be questioning enough, right? So I think it takes more effort on the part of the person and self-awareness on the part of the person to go out and actually, it's kind of like eating right. You have to go out and eat healthy things on purpose, and you have to go out and your information diet has to be somewhat diversified and somewhat, just a healthy thing. And when it comes to financial gatekeepers, that's the latest one that's being brought down.